I was placed in solitary confinement at 10 years old, and I mean that. It was solitary confinement in an adult prison.
Was that like the turning point of that connection between you and your son Aaron?
That became the turning point. And then she scrolled just a little bit more and his name came up across the bottom of the screen. Aaron Winters. And I said, "You don't need to go any further. I know who that is." It was my son. After all these years, it was my son.
In this episode, it is a continuation of a two-part episode where in part one, it was about a son finding his father, and now in part two, a father finding his son. Both have been united, but both have different perspectives of how they united. So in today's episode, we'll get to hear Brian share his story about the hardships and struggles he went through, but also the rewards of finally catching up with his son. So please, stick around to find out more, and hey, you know the drill, let's get to it. Please be aware that we will be covering sensitive topics, so if you or someone you know of is in need of help and support, then please call Lifeline on 13 11 14. That number again is 13 11 14. So let's get back to it.
Okay, today we're back here at Moore Park Beach, this time with another special guest who's also travelled all the way from Gympie, where we'll get to hear his story of his own personal experiences and his journey throughout life. So before we kick off, as always, the Roundtable symbolises a safe space where stories are shared, voices heard, and lessons learnt. So pull up a seat and join me on the journey, because every story you hear matters. And to my special guest joining me today, welcome to the Roundtable. So before we kick off, do you mind just introducing yourself?
My name is Pastor Brian Smith. I live in Gympie, have done for the last 33 years. Married for 42 years and have two daughters. One's 40 and one's 38. One's a pastor in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, her and her husband pastor a church over there, and my other daughter is in Maryborough, and she's one of the admin officers for Riverside Christian College.
Well, I'm so honoured to have you join me today on the show, Brian.
I'm pleased to be here.
Do you prefer I called you Pastor?
No, just call me Brian. That's what most people do. It's an official title, and that's the only time it gets used, basically. It's official. So most people who know who I am call me Brian.
Cool. Brian, so please take us back to the beginning of where your journey began.
Well, seeing we're talking about my newfound son, Aaron, my journey began with Aaron's mother, who we were living in New Zealand on holiday at the time for a couple of years, and unfortunately it was at a time when not every relationship was monogamous, and unfortunately I didn't know whether Aaron was my child or whether it was one of three others who could have been the father. And so I wasn't prepared to put my hand up to say I was the father, but I supported his mother the best I could through the whole situation of pregnancy and so forth. That's in 1975. And saw her through. She decided to not have an abortion, but to take the step and have the child adopted, which was probably a bit of persuading from me, because having an understanding of how precious life is, and she decided to have Aaron adopted at birth. So, in other words, Aaron came out, and that was it. She never got to see him, and he was taken into another room, and I never got to be. I was at the hospital, but I never got to see anything, and my name wasn't even on the birth certificate because that's how it was done. And I was not a practicing Christian at all. I had a belief in God, but I was definitely not a practicing Christian. My life was opposite to that. And so I had a desire to see Aaron be brought up in a Christian family, because I wasn't, and all the situations and problems that came with all that, and there's a lot of that, and some other time we might get to talk about that. I had a pretty rough childhood, and I was placed in solitary confinement at 10 years old, and I mean that. It was solitary confinement in an adult prison, and somebody forgot that I was in there, and so it was a week later. So I don't want to talk about that at the moment. But it started my life on a whole course that I don't believe was ever intended for me. So I had problems with people in uniform because of the things that went on while I was locked away, and my teenage years were very different. I left home at 14, slept on the streets, slept on, what do we call it these days, couch surfing. So, it's a whole different ballgame, and that's totally out of whack as to what I'm talking about with meeting my son at 48 years old. I knew that there was a boy there, and I knew that he'd gone to a Christian family to be brought up, which made me happy. And when I told my wife that I married 1981, and we've been together all these years, 44 years this October. And I've always warned her and said that there is a very slight possibility that I'm the father of a son, and explained the situation. My girls, when they became adults and were at that stage where they started dating, my girls lived at home until they were well into their 20s. And I thought I'd better tell them something that they might get a surprise one day if somebody knocks on the door.
Surprise, I'm your brother.
And they didn't know whether I was kidding, whether it was true, whether it was something from my past that was going to catch up, not necessarily being a son or a brother to them. Because of my past, they thought it could have meant something else. And my niece was doing Ancestry, and she decided she'd do DNA because she had no living relatives left, and close relatives left. There was only myself, and I'd always taken her under my wing as best I could for her whole life, and was always involved in one way or another. I was always like, well, even we say it to each other that we're more like brother and sister than we are like uncle and niece. And she decided to try and find some of her family, so she did Ancestry, and then eventually, of course, it got around to the DNA side of stuff. And I knew at the time, I thought, oh, well, this will sort it out one way or another. And if there'd have been,
Was that like the turning point of that connection between you and your son Aaron?
that became the turning point. If there'd have been DNA back in the day when he was born, I would have taken him and he would have been my son, and I would have brought him up the best I possibly could. But then I get a phone call all these years later when Aaron was 48 years old. Got a phone call and an email from my niece who said, I need to come up and talk to you. And I said, oh, just talk on the phone now, we'll just do FaceTime. And she said, no, I got to be there with this. This is really important. So she came up the next day, took me out onto the back veranda, and we're sitting there, and I said, so what's so important? And she started opening up the iPad and showing me. And she said, we've got a DNA match. Has come back and it's positive that I have a relative that's a first cousin, and you're involved in it. And I said, right. And then she said, have a look at this picture, and she scrolled this picture up, and I saw this picture of Aaron. I didn't know what his name was at that stage yet, and I'm not a person who recognises family unless they've got really outstanding features that are like somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't see it, and they're going, oh, you can't see it. And I said, no, I can't see that. People say all the time, oh, look, he's got his father's nose. And I say, well, give it back, you know. And what are you doing with it? It's like I just don't see that kind of recognition. And then she scrolled just a little bit more, and his name came up across the bottom of the screen, Aaron Winters. And I said, you don't need to go any further. I know who that is. It was my son. After all these years, it was my son. You're kidding me. Oh, no. And I said, how do you know him? And I said, well, his adopted parents took me in at one time when I needed a roof over my head to be able to stop getting into trouble where I could got a custodial sentence. And I need to have somewhere that would give me a home, because otherwise I had no fixed place of abode, because I was an Australian in New Zealand with no fixed place to live. So long and short of it was, these people from my mum's church offered me to go and stay with them. And they had a little baby girl, Aaron's adopted sister. And I said I stayed with them 3 years before Aaron was born. I stayed with him for about 3 months. And Aaron was adopted by them. My mum goes to church that very Sunday after Aaron came out of hospital. And my mum rang me after church and said, Brian, I've just seen your son. And I said, you can't have seen my son. He was adopted out at birth. And I said, I haven't even seen him. His mother hasn't even seen him. How could you know that you think, Mum, you know, that this is just too hurtful? And she said, I looked into his eyes, and they were your eyes looking straight back at me. And I know that is your son. My mum went and wrote it in her Bible. And I said to her, there is no way that they would allow him to be adopted, and especially into the church that we go to, or his mum went to.
Was he still a baby at that time?
He's only 4 days old, 5 days old. And she knew by looking in his eyes, she said it was the same as looking into your eyes when I held you for the first time. And I know who he is. So she wrote that in the front of her Bible in 1975. And I've always sort of laughed at it and thought, it would have been the second grandchild. And so I know it meant a lot to her, and I just didn't have the heart to say, Mum, you got it wrong. So the long and short of it was that I just forgot all about it and just left it because it was just too hurtful for me, and I didn't want to encourage Mum in this that I saw was a lie. It was just mistaken identity. It was just wishful thinking. So no more was ever talked about it in the family. I was estranged from my mum and dad. As I say, I left home at 14 and made my own way in life the best I could. So here I am. I met the reason I couldn't even consider the idea of Aaron being my son was because his mother had played up on me at least 4 times that I knew of, that others had told me about. But I still ended up marrying that girl and left and came back to Australia with her to get her away from all her so-called friends. 12 months after we got back to Brisbane, I came home from work one day and found her unfaithful with somebody else in my house. And I absolutely, I'm not going to say too much about that, but people got hurt. And I threw her out of the house. And I just wiped my life of it, and the next thing I knew I was ready to take my own life. And that started a whole different thing in my life. I would have been dead that day if somebody hadn't have been intervening for the last couple of months, talking to me, trying to get me to see the bigger picture. And I couldn't see it. But that's another whole different story. So life went on for 40 odd years. I became a pastor. I did Bible college. I couldn't read or write, and yet I still did Bible college. I could remember everything that I'd learnt in previous to the exams and stuff, if anybody's wondering. I can tell you all about it, but I passed Bible college and became a pastor the first time.
Oh, it's amazing.
So, brought my children up, my 2 girls. They're both good Christian ladies, married Christian husbands, and their life has gone on. I never wanted them to have a life like I felt I had. Never wanted them to ever go through the pressures that I went through. So, and then here I am looking at a photo with the name Winters on it, on the iPad, all those years later. And so we sent back a message, was what we had to do, was send a message back to Aaron saying, mate, I don't need DNA to tell me. Just seeing your last name Winters, I knew your uncle. Your uncle and I went and visited places and did things in New Zealand together because he was trying to help me get on the straight and narrow. And he spent so much time with me, caring and encouraging me in life. And I said, I know your mum and dad. I actually lived with your mum and dad.
So you already had a connection.
It was a connection that you never could have planned. It was all those years ago. 48, 49, would have been 50 years ago. So when I knew his mum and dad. And then to see his photo and to see his mum and his dad, and as soon as I saw I said, I know your mum's name's Bev and I know your dad's name's Colin. And I said, I know those two. I lived in the house. And you don't need to prove anything else to me. You're my son. And I'm so sorry. I said, it's going to take me a couple of weeks to get a passport to come over and see you. And he said, well, don't come yet because I'm overseas on holiday. And I said, well, so where are you? And he said, I'm in Bundaberg. I said, mate, I'll see you for breakfast. You're only 2 hours away from me. And that next day we met, and he had his birthday that weekend. We celebrated his 48th birthday. First birthday I celebrated with my son in his whole life. It was hard for my girls to realise that they actually had a stepbrother. They knew what I'd told them, but they weren't sure that it was ever going to happen, or they put it out of their minds because it was an unlikely proposition, because here we were 40 odd years later and nothing had ever happened. I'm sorry for crying, but
No, that's
it
all right,
just
mate.
tore my heart that there was the little boy that I never ever got to see, was now a grown man, almost 50 years old. Man,
Well, maybe things, happened in a way where he was raised in a beautiful Christian
I couldn't have
family
given him
upbringing.
I couldn't have given him that because I was so far from God. It wasn't funny. I could not have brought him up that way. Yeah, it's been an amazing time, and now he's here living permanently. So when he has his 50th birthday this year, we'll have known each other for 3 years in October. And he's living here permanently now with Mum and I. And he's we're just catching up. We're just starting our life together. And I want to get to know him real well. And he wanted to come and stay with us, come and live with us. And I just, how can I not? How could we not? And he's so helpful. He's so helpful. He's already painted half my house since I got here. And he's only been here, 2 months? 3 months? And it's just been an awesome time, mate. If there's a crowning glory apart from meeting Jesus Christ, it's definitely meeting my son.
Hey guys, thanks again for tuning back in. And please, if you do find value in today's show, then hit that like and share button. I'd really appreciate it. But more importantly, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button too, as it really does help my channel to grow so I can continue to find stories like these and share it with you guys. And also helps make a difference in the community for the great services of some of these local charity organizations are doing. So, you know the drill. Let's return back to the episode.
So, if you could share your message with someone that's probably either worried about a situation within the family, what would be?
If there's one thing I've learnt, before this all came up on Ancestry, I've been half bedridden for years now. I've had kidney disease where I lost both my kidneys ended up years on dialysis, got another kidney. My heart was in problems, ended up getting a quadruple bypass, and there's a whole great big long story in that about how God kept me alive when I was dead. It's just amazing to see what God's done over the years in my life. You just can't deny that there truly is a God.
That's definitely for another story, mate.
Definitely is, mate, because it's just been amazing, and now to be, you know, to be able to be a dad and have a son is awesome. It's awesome. I can just see God's hand. I prayed for God to literally open my eyes and show me where in my past that He had intervened in my life before I actually knew God. And He's done it 3 times now. And each one is just awesome, amazing how it could have only come together because God showed me. And I'd never seen it, and yet it happened to me, and yet I never saw it until God opened my eyes and brought another fact forward and put it all together, and the jigsaw just was like that last piece in a jigsaw. God's just amazing. So, much more I could tell you. Much more.
Well, we'll probably have to save that for another time, Brian.
Yeah.
The main thing is how you were able to connect with your son, Aaron. And look, before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts towards this whole connection, the miracle of the unity between both you and your son, Aaron? What would it be?
It'd be that he gets to know his real dad, and it doesn't disappoint him that the first half of my life was why he ended up being adopted, because that was my life, you know.
I understand back in those days was a bit different.
It certainly was. Oh, mate, it's just finding time. It's reopened things in me that I had totally forgotten about and saying, and then we're talking because he wants to understand how I lived and who I was and who his mother was, and I find it very hard to talk about his mother without degrading her, because it was a very hurtful time in my life as well. And so it's very difficult to talk about her, but I don't want to give Aaron all the hurt and stuff from me. I don't want him to look at his mother like that. I want him to look at his mother, how did she fare? You know, she did the best she could.
Absolutely.
In her understanding. And I'm just over the moon that, you know, he does get to meet with his mother. So far she doesn't want to know. I have never spoken to his mother since that last day. And but I don't want him thinking she was a horrible, mean person, because she wasn't. That wasn't her. She just had some bad habits and some bad ways about what she did. But that doesn't mean that's his first impressions don't need to be that bad that it makes him not even want to go seeing his mum. I don't want to stop him from that, because I know how much it's meant to me meeting my son. We got to learn to forgive in this world. There's too much hurt and sorrow. It's everywhere. There's so many. Everybody's got a story, as you say. Everybody's got a story. But we've got to learn to grow. We've got to learn to forgive. One of the hardest things for me to learn was to not hold grudges. Because when you hold grudges, it's something that you're carrying around. It's something that's affecting you. It's not affecting the other person. It's affecting you. It's eating you up in the inside. It's causing you to think badly about this situation, that situation. And it's because you're holding a grudge, you're holding a hurt that you should have put down and got on with life. Because there's so much life to get on with, and we do only have a short time.
Well, then, just quickly, how does one do that?
I can only tell you one way. One way is understanding that God's Son died for us. He was put upon a cross. He was totally blameless for what they put him on the cross for. Even the pilot and the government of the day even said, I washed my hands of this. And he took a bowl of water and he washed his hand and he said, I will not have this held against me. I'll wash my hands of this whole affair. This is up to you guys. If that's what you want to do, well, I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not going to be party to it. And Jesus was crucified for being a good man. You've got to be kidding, you know. And he rose again. I don't care who you call God. Your God's actually dead. Whereas Jesus was alive and saw over 140 times. And there's probably even more times that I don't know about, but that's just what I know about over the years. I've learnt. And he was seen, and he ate, and he walked, and he talked, and he slept, and he came back to life after they'd killed him. And he said, now, I'm offering salvation to everybody who looks to me for salvation. They will be granted salvation. And that's what changed my life on a lounge room floor, ready to blow my brains out because of that situation. That's the change. That's the kicker. You know, I'm one of the mentors with Marcus Mission, suicide prevention. When people get to the end, they don't know where else to go. It's because they have got to the end of their understanding, not of somebody else's understanding who can come in and put an arm around them and say, hey mate, let's find something good here. Let's see what we can do, you know. And sometimes all it takes is just being a friend, just being a mate, just standing there holding each other up. There's a famous picture from World War II in New Guinea, where these guys were on the other side, on the northern side of New Guinea, and they were coming back, the wounded were coming back. And there's one soldier with a bandage over his eye and just keeping himself up, and he's got another guy with a in a crutch and a bandaged arm, and they're helping each other get across this rocky flowing river. I remember many years ago, like in my early teens, seeing that first picture. That's what mateship's about. That's what true friendship's about. Even though you're going through heck in your own life, is reaching out and holding somebody else up from drowning, somebody else up from going through what they're going through so tough. That's when you know you found a true friend, because somebody's paused to help you. And it's like our mutual friend Neil. That's what he does, because somebody did it for him. If that's all that it is, then that's worthwhile. But it means so much more. It means so much more.
Well, Pastor Brian, thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And hey, I look forward
Appreciate it,
to more stories to be shared throughout the rest of this year, hopefully we can still catch up with some more.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you again.